Last Thanksgiving, my mother stood up at the head of the table, lifted her wine glass in front of 14 people, family, 2 ladies from her church, the neighbors from across the street, and she said, "I've got 2 girls. One of them stands up in a courtroom and wins. And the other one?" She smiled, and let it hang there. "Well, the other one cleans up other people's messes for a living. But bless her heart, she's real thorough." 14 people laughed. I counted them. I always count. My sister laughed the loudest. My father looked down at his plate and pushed his green beans around with his fork. And me, I just kept moving, kept refilling the water glasses, kept doing the one thing that family had always expected me to do, which was to disappear into being useful. My name is Cora. I'm 33 years old. And what my mother didn't know, what none of those 14 laughing people at that table knew, was that the spotless country club my father bragged about at every dinner, the one whose ballroom my sister had just rented for her firm's gala the month before, the gleaming office tower where my sister parked her partner-level title every single morning, all of it was kept clean, every night, by a company. My company. They had been complimenting my work to my face for 2 years. They just never once thought to ask whose name was on the contract. So when my mother sat back down, pleased as anything with her little joke, I set down that water pitcher. And I said one sentence. One. And I watched all 14 of those people go dead silent, the kind of silent where you can hear the ice settle in the glasses. I didn't raise my voice. I've never been a yeller. My Aunt Junie used to say the strongest thing in any room is almost never the loudest. So I just said my one quiet sentence, and that whole table of laughing people stopped laughing at the exact same time, like somebody had pulled a plug out of the wall. I'm going to tell you exactly what that sentence was. And I'm going to tell you what happened 3 weeks later, in a ballroom with 600 people in it, where the same 4 faces from that Thanksgiving table had to sit and watch something they will never recover from. But to understand any of it, you've got to understand the family first. So stay with me. And listen, if you've ever been the one in your family who got looked straight through, like a window instead of a person, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read them. I want to know you're out there. Because I promise you, you are not alone. Not even a little. We grew up in Buckhead, in Atlanta, on a quiet street called Camellia Lane where the lawns were always cut in those neat diagonal stripes and the magnolias dropped their big white blooms all over the sidewalks every spring. My parents bought the house in 1996, a tall brick colonial with black shutters and a circular drive, the kind of place built for hosting, for letting people see how well the Bellamys were doing. My mother, Sylvia, was 60. She'd sold luxury real estate in Buckhead for 20-some years before she retired, which meant she'd spent her whole working life walking strangers through other people's beautiful houses and learning to want them. She believed in 3 things, in this order: the Lord, what the neighbors thought, and her firstborn daughter. My father, Roland, was 64. A retired insurance man. A quiet one. The kind of quiet that people mistake for being wise, when really it's just a man who learned a long time ago that the easiest way through a room is to not make any waves in it. His answer to every cruel thing my mother ever said about me was the same. He'd find me in the kitchen afterward, pat my shoulder, and say, "Your mama means well, Cora. You know how she gets." That was it. That was the whole defense my father ever mounted for me in 33 years. And then there was Adrienne. My older sister. 36 years old. A partner, my mother would say, and you could hear the capital letters, at Holloway and Crane, one of the big white shoe law firms downtown, 40 floors up in a glass tower you could see from the highway. Here's the math of a family like mine, and once you see it you can't unsee it. There's one child the love flows toward, easy, like water running downhill. And there's one child who has to carry buckets uphill her whole life just to get a sip. Growing up, I was never just Cora. I was Adrienne's little sister. Teachers would see my last name on the roll on the first day of school and light right up. "Oh, Are you Adrian Bellamy's sister? She was just the brightest thing. And then they'd look at me, and you could watch the light dim down, just a notch, when they figured out I wasn't going to be bright in that same blinding way. And I wasn't, to be fair. I was a solid B+ kid. Honor roll, not valedictorian. I made the soccer team but rode the bench. I was in the choir but never got a solo. I was fine. I was average. And in a house that only knew how to clap for excellence, average might as well have been a failure. When Adrian got into law school, my parents threw a party for 50 people and rented the back room at a steakhouse. My mother gave a toast so long that my aunt cried twice. When I finished my associate's degree at the community college, which I paid for myself, scooping froyo and answering phones, my mother said, "That's nice, sweetheart. Hand me the rolls." No party. No toast. Just rolls. When Adrian bought her first condo, my parents wrote her a check for the down payment. $40,000. When I moved into my first apartment, a little one-bedroom over a dry cleaner in a part of town my mother sniffed at, she asked me, in front of company, whether I really thought I could afford to live alone, given everything. When Adrian got engaged, my mother wept with joy at the dinner table. For 4 years, I worked at my sister's law firm. It started as a favor. That's how she made sure I understood it, a favor, something she was generously bestowing on her poor little sister. I was 26, I just lost a receptionist job when the company downsized, and Adrian called me one afternoon and said, "There's a front desk spot opening up at Holloway." I put in a word. Don't embarrass me. I should have heard it. That little blade under the kindness. Don't embarrass me. But I was hungry to belong somewhere, even the edge of her world, so I took it and I told myself it was love. And Lord, did I work. I was at that front desk by 7:15 every morning. I learned the name of every client and every client's assistant. I knew which partner took his coffee black and which one was secretly terrified of public speaking and needed a glass of water set out before depositions. I remembered birthdays. I covered for people. I stayed past 9 some nights, alone, sorting the file room nobody else would touch, because I wanted them to look at me and see Cora, competent, steady, worth keeping, instead of Adrienne's little sister at the desk. For 4 years I thought it was working. Then one Tuesday morning in the spring of 2021, the office manager, a tight-smiled woman named Brenda, called me into a conference room with a folder in front of her and a look on her face I'd never seen. "Cora, have a seat." I sat. "We've gotten some concerns. About fit. About professionalism." She wouldn't look at me directly. She looked at the folder, the window, the door. "We're going to let you go. Today. HR has your last check ready. You'll have 20 minutes to gather your things." 20 minutes. 4 years. Perfect attendance, not one written complaint in my whole file, and they were walking me out a side door in 20 minutes flat. I packed a cardboard box. A little framed photo of my parents. A mug that said, "World's Okayest Receptionist," that I'd bought as a joke. A jade plant I'd kept alive on that desk for 3 years. And as I walked toward the elevators, I passed Adrienne's office. Her door. 2 weeks later my phone rang. It was Dana, the paralegal I'd sat near for 3 years, the closest thing I had to a friend in that building. "Cora," she said, and her voice was already shaking. "I have to tell you something, and I'm probably going to get fired for it, but I can't keep sitting on it." "Okay." It was Adrian. She went to Brenda. "She said you were," she used the word liability. She said it was awkward for her, having her sister at the front desk now that she'd made partner. She said clients were confused. She told them you had an attitude problem. Dana's voice cracked. "None of it's true, Cora. Everybody knows it's not true. But she's a partner." Nobody was going to fight a partner over the girl at the front desk. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot for 2 hours after that call. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there with my hands on the wheel, trying to understand how the sister I'd spent my whole life trying to win could look at me at her own front desk and decide I was an embarrassment to be removed. I had $3,800 in credit card debt. No job. No reference I could safely use. And no way to tell my parents the truth without it sounding like an attack on their golden child, which, in that family, was the one unforgivable sin. So I didn't tell them the truth. I told them I left because I wanted a change. Because I was burned out. My mother sighed into the phone and said, "Well, I hope you land somewhere soon. It's embarrassing when the Hendersons ask what you're doing and I don't have an answer." I landed somewhere. Just not anywhere she'd have ever thought to look. That night, the lowest night, I didn't call my mother and I didn't call my friends, who'd have told me to march into that firm and make a scene. I called the one person in my whole family who had ever asked me how I was doing and actually waited for the real answer. I called my Aunt Junie. Junie was my daddy's younger sister, 61 years old, and in the Bellamy family she was the cautionary tale. She'd been divorced twice. She ran a little diner off the highway, booths, pie under glass domes, the works. My mother used to point at her like a warning. "You don't want to end up like your Aunt Junie, do you?" But Junie was the only grown-up in my childhood who ever looked at me and saw a whole person. She picked up on the second ring. "Cora, baby. What happened?" Not, "What's wrong?" She already knew something was wrong. I told her everything, the firing, Dana's call, my own sister sliding the knife in to keep her partner's image clean. When I finished, Junie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I have never once forgotten. "Baby, I've been this family's disappointment for 30 years, so let me tell you what I know. Don't you give them the show. Don't let them watch you bleed, and don't let them watch you crawl back either. You just go quiet, and you go to work, and you build. You don't have to announce a sunrise, Cora. You don't have to call everybody and tell them it's coming. It just shows up, and the whole sky has to deal with it." That was the night I stopped being Adrienne's little sister. That was the night the sun started coming up. I had rent due and a stack of bills, so I did the thing that, 3 weeks later, would become my mother's favorite joke. A friend of a friend knew an elderly man in Buckhead who needed help around his house. I needed cash. So I started cleaning. His name was Harlan Webb. 78 years old, a widower, rattling around alone in a big old house with more rooms than he had reasons to use. He paid me $140 a visit, cash, twice a week. For the first month or two I just cleaned, scrubbed, mopped, organized closets. And there was something almost peaceful in it. Nobody was watching me. Nobody was measuring me against Adrian. I could vanish into the work and forget, for a few hours, that my life had come apart. But then I started noticing things. Mr. Webb's house was spotless, but his life was a mess. Stacks of unopened mail. A garage door that had been broken for half a year. A refrigerator full of food going bad because he couldn't keep track of what he'd bought. So one day, without him asking, I sorted his mail into folders by due date. I called a repair company about the garage. I cleaned out the fridge and wrote him a grocery list in big letters. He stood in that kitchen and his eyes welled up. "My own kids don't do this for me," he said. "They don't even call." And that was the moment something clicked in my head that changed the whole shape of my life. I realized, rich people don't actually want clean. Clean is the easy part. What they want is invisible. They want somebody who sees everything and says nothing. Somebody who makes their whole life. On a Wednesday in September of 2022, I drove down to the county office and filed the paperwork for a company. The clerk asked me what we did. "We make things spotless for people who can't afford for anything to go wrong," I said. She blinked at me. I paid the filing fee and walked out the founder of Sterling Facilities Group. The first year nearly killed me. I worked 18-hour days. I hired 2 people, Marisol, a housekeeper I'd met through Mr. Webb, and a young guy named Terrell who needed work and could fix anything with a motor. We took every job we could get. Houses, then small offices, then a dental practice, then a boutique hotel that needed a backup crew. If somebody needed something cleaned, managed, organized, or quietly handled, and they could pay, we figured out how to do it and do it better than the last people. By the end of that first year we had 9 accounts and I was bringing home barely enough to make payroll and keep my own lights on. I almost quit 3 separate times. Once I sat in my car outside the bank and cried, the only time I cried in that whole stretch, because I was so tired and so scared and so sure my mother was right about me after all. And then I'd hear Junie. "You don't have to announce a sunrise." And I'd wipe my face and go back to work. I taught myself everything. Quality control systems off of business books from the library. Training checklists I built from scratch. I learned how to bid a commercial contract, how to read a service level agreement, how to staff a building overnight so that the people who used it by day never saw a soul. I learned that the higher end the client, the more they would pay for that exact disappearing act, and I was the best in the city at disappearing. In the spring of 2023, an email came in that changed everything. It was from a woman named Diane Marchetti. Diane was in her 60s, sharp as a tack, and she owned Marchetti Hospitality, a small portfolio of luxury properties, the crown jewel of which was a downtown hotel called the Whitfield, where rooms started at $600 a night and the presidential suite ran $4,000. Her previous facilities vendor had just blown up in a scandal, staff caught taking things from guest rooms, sloppy work papered over with excuses. Diane needed someone new. Someone discreet. Someone who understood that in luxury hospitality, your reputation is the entire product. One of my clients had passed along my name. I met her in her office. She sat behind a desk that cost more than my car and looked at me like she was reading the fine print on my soul. "Everybody who walks in here promises me discretion," she said. "Why should I believe you're different?" I thought about Adrian. About my mother. About a lifetime of being the blur in the background of the family photo. And I told her the truth. "Mrs. Marchetti, I've been invisible my whole life. I know exactly how to make other people feel completely taken care of while I stay completely unseen. Most people have to learn that. I was raised in it." She looked at me for a long beat. Then she slid a contract across that big desk. $26,000 a month. 18-month term. "Can you handle it?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. I had no earthly idea if I could. But I figured it out. I hired 10 more people. I built the protocols overnight. And it worked. It worked so well that Diane signed a second contract before the first one was up, and then she did the thing that takes a small company and makes it a real one. She started telling her rich friends. By the end of 2024, Sterling Facilities Group held the contracts for the Whitfield Hotel, 2 corporate office towers downtown, and here is where you need to pay attention, because this is the part that matters, Camellia Hills Country Club. The country club my parents had belonged to for 20 years. The club my father bragged about at every single family dinner. I want you to sit with how that happened, because I didn't go chasing that club out of spite. The country club's general manager stayed at the Whitfield for a conference, saw how my crews ran that hotel, and called me himself. He had no idea my parents were members. I had no idea, when I signed it, that I'd just put my own company in charge of the floors my mother walked across in her good heels every Sunday after church. I found out 3 weeks later, when my father mentioned at dinner that the club finally hired some outfit that knows what they're doing, and I had to set down my fork and go get more sweet tea so nobody would see my face. That's the thing about building in the dark. Sometimes the universe hands you a piece of poetry so perfect you can't even react to it out loud. If you're enjoying this, if you're rooting for the quiet one, do me a quick favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps these stories reach the next person who needs to hear that the overlooked daughter is the one who wins in the end. Then come right back, because the table is almost set. By the fall of 2025, Sterling had 41 employees. We ran out of a real office in a real building. Our revenue for the year was on track to clear $2.5 million. And I drove a 6-year-old Honda. I wore jeans and plain cardigans to family things. I lived in a perfectly nice but perfectly modest apartment. And when my mother asked me, the same way she always asked, what it was I did these days, I'd say, "Just cleaning, Mama." Same as always. And she would do what she always did. She would not ask a single follow-up question. None of them ever did. Because the answer didn't interest them. I had already been filed, years ago, under the one who didn't amount to much, and nobody reopens a file they've already closed. So I let them keep it closed. I'd sit at Sunday dinner and listen to my father hold court about how the club had finally gotten its act together. "I'll tell you, the new cleaning outfit they brought in 2 years ago, night and day," he'd say, buttering a roll. "Bathrooms like a hospital. Course Adrian had her firm's event in the ballroom last month and Preston said you could eat off that floor. Whoever runs that company knows what they're doing." I'd sit there with my water glass and say nothing. My crew cleaned the ballroom my sister threw her gala in. My crew handled the tower where Adrian stepped off the Thanksgiving. The last Thursday in November, 2025. I drove over to Camellia Lane in my Honda, in jeans and a gray sweater, with a $40 bottle of wine I knew my mother would set on the counter and never open. She'd serve whatever Adrian brought instead, with a little speech about the vineyard. I parked at the very end of the drive, where I'd parked my whole life. The good spots up by the door, shaded by my mother's $300 a year azaleas, those were for Adrienne's white Range Rover and Preston's black one. There were 14 of us that year. My parents. Adrienne and Preston. Their 2 kids, Hayes and Margot, tearing through the house. My mother's sister, Aunt Renee, and her husband. 2 ladies from my mother's church, Miss Judith and Miss Carol, both in cardigans and pearls. The Okonkwo's from next door, he'd been a cardiologist, she'd been a judge, both retired, both kind. And one of Adrienne's law firm friends, a woman named Whitney, who laughed at everything Adrienne said. For the first 2 hours, I was furniture. I refilled the water. I cleared the appetizer plates. I checked the turkey. I refolded the napkins because my mother said I'd done them wrong. 4 times in 2 hours somebody asked me to fetch, carry, or fix something. Not once did anybody ask me to sit down. At one point I was carrying a tray through the den when little Hayes tugged my sleeve and asked, in that loud clear way kids have, "Aunt Cora, why are you always in the kitchen?" And from across the room, Adrienne laughed and said, "Because that's where she's happiest, baby." She said it light. Playful. A joke. But I caught Mrs. Okonkwo's face, the retired judge, and just for a second something crossed it. Something that looked like the start of standing up. Then it passed, and the party went on. We sat down to eat a little before 7. The table was beautiful, white cloth, the good china, the napkins and those fans. My seat was at the far end, by the kitchen door, in case anybody needed anything. My mother stood up at the head with her wine glass and her done that morning hair and said, "Before we eat, I want to say a few words." She thanked the Lord. She thanked my father for 38 years. She thanked the grandbabies. She thanked Preston for taking such good care of our Adrienne. And then she turned the full warmth of her voice on my sister. And most of all, I want to thank Adrienne. My daughter. I set down the water pitcher. I laid my napkin beside my plate. And I stood up. The laughter trailed off. My mother looked at me, confused, her glass still raised. "Cora? Is something the matter, honey?" "No, Mama," I said. And my voice came out calm. Calmer than I'd ever heard it. "Nothing's the matter. I actually want to thank you. For being so clear, in front of everybody, about exactly what you think I am." The room had gone quiet. Forks down. "You want to tell these folks I clean up other people's messes," I said. "All right. Let's tell them the rest of it." I looked at my father. "Daddy, that cleaning company you keep going on about at the club, the one that turned the place around, the one Preston said you could eat off the ballroom floor at? That's Sterling Facilities Group." I looked at Preston. "It's the same company that services your firm's tower, Adrienne. 40 floors. Every night. The same building you've worked in for years." I looked back at my mother. "I own it. I founded it. I built it from one client and a vacuum cleaner into a $2.5 million company with 41 employees, and it has been quietly keeping spotless every single building this family is proud to be seen in for 2 years now." Nobody moved. "You've all been complimenting my work to my face since 2023, I said. "You just never once thought to ask whose name was on the contract. Because in your minds, a girl like me could only ever hold the mop." I picked up my purse. "So yes, Mama. I clean. I clean the rooms y'all are too proud to be caught dead in unless they're spotless. And I'm extremely good at it." You were right about that part. You could have heard a pin drop on that white tablecloth. 14 faces, frozen. My mother's mouth opened and nothing came out. Adrienne had gone the color of the tablecloth. My father had his eyes. I was 3 miles down the road, sitting in the parking lot of a drugstore with my hands shaking on the wheel, when my phone rang. It was 7:41. The name on the screen was Aunt Renee, my mother's own sister. I almost didn't pick up. I figured she was calling to tell me I'd embarrassed my mother, that I owed an apology. But something made me answer. Cora. Her voice was thin. I have to tell you something, and I should have told you months ago, and I am so ashamed I didn't. She took a breath. There's a group chat. The family one. The one you're not in. It's called The Real Family. I'm going to send you screenshots. I've been sitting on them since August because I'm a coward. After tonight I can't sit on them anymore. My phone started buzzing. Screenshot after screenshot. The chat went back well over a year. My mother. My sister. Aunt Renee. A couple of cousins. A little gold heart emoji in the chat name. And in it, a year and a half of my own family talking about me like I was a problem to be managed. The first one was from a spring day, about Adrienne's 40th birthday party. My mother had written, should we even tell Cora about the party? She'll show up in her work clothes and somebody will ask what she does and I'll have to explain her all night. Maybe just keep it small. Family that counts. Adrienne had written back, just tell her it's adults only dinner, very low key. She won't dig. She never digs. She's so easy to manage. And then, further down, a line from my mother that I had to read 4 times before my brain would accept it. Some days I swear I'd have been happier with just the one girl. My own mother. In writing. With a little gold heart at the top of the screen. I kept scrolling. Message after message. Excuses for leaving me off invitations. My sister calling me a vibe killer. My mother explaining that Sunday dinners just flow better when it's only Adrienne's family. And then the last one, dated 3 days before Thanksgiving. Adrienne, don't stress about Thursday, Mom. I've got something planned that'll put her back in her lane for good. Just follow my lead on the toast. Face with tears of joy. The toast. It hadn't been a careless thing my mother blurted out. It had been planned. Discussed. Approved. Rehearsed. My own sister had written the Maid joke and walked my mother through the delivery, 3 days in advance, with a laughing emoji, and a whole family group chat had read it and not one of them had warned me. I sat in that drugstore parking lot for 45 minutes. I read every screenshot twice. And I want to tell you, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. What I felt was something stranger and better than either. I felt clear. Like somebody had finally flipped on the lights in a room I'd been stumbling around in my whole life, bumping into the furniture, wondering if maybe I was just clumsy. I wasn't clumsy. The room had been rigged the whole time. They hadn't just overlooked me. They'd organized it. They'd written it down. They'd put a gold heart on it. I made a folder on my phone. I labeled it Receipts. I saved every screenshot. And then I drove home. The next morning, Black Friday, I woke up to an email. But this one wasn't from my family. It was from Diane Marchetti. The subject line read, Georgia Business Vanguard Award, congratulations. Dear Cora, it said. It is my privilege to tell you that you have been selected as this year's recipient of the Georgia Business Vanguard Award, presented by the Metro Atlanta Business Council. The ceremony will be held December 18th at the Whitfield. 600 guests, members of the press, and a few words from you. I nominated you myself. I have watched you grow this company from a single employee into the finest operation of its kind in this city, and I have rarely been prouder of anything. I do hope you'll accept. With admiration, Diane. I read it 3 times. December 18th. 3 weeks out. 600 people. Press. And held in the ballroom of the Whitfield, the hotel my own crew kept spotless every single night. The invitation came with 10 complimentary seats. I looked at that number. 10. And I thought about the 14 people who had laughed at me the night before. And I thought about Junie, and about sunrises, and about a sister who'd written a joke 3 days in advance with a laughing emoji. I called Aunt Junie that evening and we talked for 2 hours. I read her the group chat screenshots, every one, and I listened to her go very quiet on the other end. When I finished, she said, "What are you going to do, baby? You could burn it all down. Send those screenshots to every soul they know. Post them where the whole church can see." I'd thought about it. In the parking lot, I'd imagined it 100 ways, forwarding it all, watching their pretty story crumble, making them feel for one day the way they'd made me feel for 33 years. That's exactly what they'd do, though, I said slowly. Isn't it? If they were me. They'd humiliate. They'd make a show of it. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. I'm not them, Junie. I don't want to destroy them. I just want to stop hiding, and let them sit in what they've done. How? I'm going to invite them, I said. Mama. Daddy. Over the next 3 weeks I wrote that speech 7 times. The first version was furious. I named names. I quoted the group chat word for word. I pictured myself reading, "Some days I'd have been happier with just the one girl," off a card while 600 people gasped and my mother shrank into her chair. The second version was sad. All childhood. All wanting. The little girl who set the table and waited her whole life to be asked to sit at it. The third was bitter. The fourth felt like begging. The fifth ran too long. The sixth said nothing at all. And on the 7th, I deleted every other version and I finally understood something that set me free. The best revenge in this world is not humiliation. Humiliation is loud, and it fades, and it makes you smaller in the doing of it. The best revenge is becoming someone they are no longer able to look away from. I didn't need to read their texts to a ballroom. I didn't need to name a single one of them. I just needed to stand in a spotlight they would never in their lives be able to reach, and tell the plain truth about where I came from, and let them sit in the dark and recognize themselves in every word. The final speech was 8 minutes long. It didn't mention my family one time. And every person at that table was going to hear themselves in all of it. If you've made it this far with me, if you've ever had to choose between burning it all down and just quietly winning, type "quietly winning" in the comments right now. I want to see how many of us chose the harder, better road. I have a feeling it's a lot of you. December 18th came faster than I expected. I bought a dress. Deep navy, simple, the kind that doesn't try too hard because it doesn't have to. Junie came to my apartment that afternoon and did my hair in soft waves and stepped back and said, "You look like the woman in charge." "I am the woman in charge," I said. She got a little misty. "Yes, you are." At 6:15 my phone buzzed. Instagram. Adrian had posted a photo, her and Preston, dressed to the nines, champagne flutes up, in the lobby of the Whitfield. The caption read, "Date night at a business gala downtown." Blessed. They were there. They had no idea. I came in through the staff entrance, the one my own crew used, and I knew the man at the door by name and he lit up when he saw me. Diane met me backstage in a silver gown. "Ready?" she asked. I looked through the gap in the curtain at 600 people at white-clothed tables, business leaders, city council, reporters with cameras. And down front, at a table the staff had numbered 14, I almost laughed at the number, sat my mother in burgundy, my father in the suit he'd owned for 20 years, Adrian in emerald green, Preston checking his phone under the table. Laughing. Drinking. Completely in the dark. "I've been ready 3 years," I said. The program ran. Speeches, sponsors, a video about the council. I barely heard a word. I watched table 14. I watched my mother lean over to whisper to Adrian. I watched my father look around the room with the vague discomfort of a man who can't say why he feels out of place. And I'll tell you the strange thing I felt, standing there behind that curtain in my navy dress. It wasn't rage, and it wasn't nerves. It was something close to grief. Because there was a little girl still in me, 12 years old with a blue ribbon nobody came to see, and that little girl had wanted this exact thing her whole life. Not the award. The watching. Just to be watched by them while somebody said out loud that she was something. And here it finally was, and they were about to get it, and it had taken building a $2.5 million company and a 600-person ballroom to make them look up from their plates. That's the part that breaks your heart, if you let it. How much it took. How little it should have. I didn't let it. I breathed, the way Junie taught me, and I waited for my name. At 7:45, the MC, a local news anchor, stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, the highlight of our evening. The Georgia Business Vanguard Award." The room hushed. This honor goes to a leader who built something extraordinary from nothing. Sterling Facilities Group was founded just 3 years ago with a single employee. Today it employs over 40 people. It services some of the most prestigious properties in this city, including the very ballroom you are sitting in tonight. A murmur went around the room. The good kind. The sound of 600 people being impressed. Its founder, the anchor said, started with a mop and a vision. She was told, more than once, by people who should have known better, that she would never amount to much. He paused. "Tonight, we have the privilege of proving them wrong. Please welcome, Cora Bellamy." I heard my mother gasp before I even stepped into the light. I heard it from backstage. The curtain opened. The spotlight hit my face. And I walked out across that stage in front of 600 people, including the 4 at table 14 who had spent my whole life wishing I were a little easier to explain. I didn't look at them. Not yet. I reached the podium. I thanked the council. And then I said, "I want to tell you a true story. About a woman who, 4 years ago, had nothing. I let it breathe. I was fired from a job I gave everything to. I had debt, no references, no plan, and I was 27 years old with no idea what was going to become of me. So I started cleaning houses. Not because I dreamed of it. Because I had to eat. I saw my mother shift in her seat. And somewhere in there, I said, I found out I was good at something. Not just at cleaning, at seeing what people needed before they knew they needed it. At making folks feel completely taken care of while I stayed completely out of sight. I let the word land. Invisible. I was very, very good at being invisible. I'd had a lot of practice. Mrs. Okonkwo, the judge, was in the audience as a council member. I saw her hand come up to her mouth. I built this company with my own 2 hands. 1 client. Then 5. Then 50. I worked 18-hour days. I doubted myself more times than I can count. And then I looked, for the first time, directly at table 14. And there were people in my life, people who were supposed to love me, who told me I would never be anything. Who called me an embarrassment. Who left me off the invitations because they were ashamed to explain me. My mother's hand flew to her chest. There was a reception after. I was swarmed, business leaders wanting my card, a reporter wanting an interview, Diane hugging me so hard I couldn't breathe, Junie crying into a cocktail napkin and saying, "The sun came up, baby, the sun came all the way up," over and over. But I kept one eye on the door, because I knew she'd come. At 8:32, my mother appeared. Alone. Mascara streaked down her face, hands trembling. She crossed the lobby toward me slow, like the floor might give out. "Cora." Her voice broke on it. "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at her. At the woman who carried me, raised me, and wrote in a group chat with a gold heart on it that she'd have been happier with just the one girl. "Would you have believed me, Mama?" I asked. "Or would you have found a way to make even this about Adrian?" Her mouth opened and closed. "That's what I thought," I said. "Not cruel. Just true." "I didn't mean it," she said. "The things at the table. The messages. You meant every word," I said. "You just never thought I'd be standing somewhere you couldn't talk over me when I read them back." I watched her flinch. "But here's the thing, Mama. I'm not angry. I came here tonight thinking I might be, and I'm not. I'm just done. Done waiting. Done reaching for a hand that was never going to reach back." Her eyes filled. Are we still family?" I picked up my clutch. "We've always been family," I said. "You're the one who never treated me like it." And I walked away. In the days after, my mother called 12 times. I didn't answer. The voicemail started with, "I'm sorry, but," and that little word "but" told me everything I needed to know, so I deleted them all. Adrian sent one email, subject line, "We need to talk." I archived it without opening it. My father called once. On the 4th day. I answered. "Cora." His voice was old and tired. "It's Daddy." "I know." A long silence, the silence of 33 years of things never said. "I'm sorry," he finally got out. "I should have stood up for you. Years ago. 100 times. I should have said something." "You should have, Daddy," I said. "But you didn't." "I know." His breath came shaky down the line. "I still love you, Cora." "I know you do," I said. "But love that never once stands up isn't quite love yet. It's just a feeling you kept to yourself." The call lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, I waited to feel triumphant, and I didn't. What I felt was quiet. Settled. Like a window that had been rattling in its frame my whole life had finally gone still. "I want to be honest with you about something, because I think it matters." There was a version of me that wanted my father to grovel. That wanted him to weep and beg and finally choose me out loud the way he never had. But sitting there after we hung up, I realized I didn't need that anymore. Not because I'd forgiven everything. I hadn't, not yet, but because his approval had stopped being the currency I lived on. For 33 years, one nod from that man could have made my whole month. And somewhere between the firing and the ballroom, the exchange rate had changed. His opinion of me just didn't buy what it used to. That's not bitterness. That's freedom. They feel almost the same from the outside. I didn't cut them off completely. I didn't block numbers or burn bridges or swear I'd never speak to any of them again. That's not who I am, and it's not who I want to become. But I stopped chasing. For 33 years I had been the one who reached out, who showed up, who kept hoping that this dinner, this holiday, this achievement would finally be the one that made them see me. After that night, I just stopped. I let them come to me. And if they never did, if they chose their pride over me the way they always had, well, that would be an answer too. That Christmas was the first one I didn't spend on Camellia Lane. Junie and I rented a little cabin up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We made too much food and drank cocoa on the porch and watched the fog roll down the hills every morning, and I slept like I hadn't slept in years. My mother mailed a present. I sent it back unopened, not out of spite, but because I wasn't ready to start pretending again, and a gift in that family always came with a bill attached. In January, I got an email I didn't expect. It was from Mrs. Okonkwo, the judge, the neighbor, the one woman at that Thanksgiving table who hadn't laughed. I have thought about that dinner every day since, she wrote. I sat there and said nothing, and I have spent 40 years on a bench telling myself I'm a person who speaks up. Watching you on that stage, I realized something. It is always our place to speak. When we see someone treated like that, it is always our place. I am sorry I was quiet. You are a remarkable woman, Cora. I would be honored to know you, just as you, not as anyone's sister. I wrote back one word. Coffee? She said yes. We've become real friends. Funny how the people who hurt you can lead you straight to the people who'll finally help you heal. A couple weeks after that, an envelope showed up at my office, a real, handwritten letter, which nobody does anymore. It was from Whitney, my sister's friend, the one who'd laughed loudest at the toast. I have started this letter 4 times, she wrote. I laughed because Adrian laughed, and that is the most cowardly sentence I have ever had to write about myself. I didn't even know you. I just knew which side of the table the power was on, and I picked it. Watching you on that stage, I felt sick, not at you, at me. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of us that night. I didn't write her back right away. I sat with it a few days. But I kept the letter, because a person owning their cowardice out loud is rarer than you'd think, and it deserved to be kept. Here's what I want you to take from all of this, if you take anything. This was never about revenge. It was never about watching my family suffer or getting the last word. That's a sugar high, it feels good for a second and it fixes nothing. This was about freedom. For 33 years I waited for my mother to be proud of me. For my father to stand up. For my sister to treat me like an equal instead of a liability. I waited, and they didn't, and somewhere in there I finally understood. I don't need their permission to exist. I don't need their applause to know what I've built. And I don't need them to love me right in order to know I was always worth loving. They saw me that night. For the first time in my life, all the way, they really saw me. And here's the part that surprised even me. By the time they did, it didn't matter anymore. Because somewhere between a widower's kitchen and a 600-person ballroom, I'd already learned to see myself. If you're watching this and you recognized your own family in mine, if you're the other one, the overlooked one, the one they call the embarrassment, I need you to hear me. You do not have to prove anything to them. You do not have to wait for them to change. You just have to live. Build quietly. Grow in the dark if you have to. And one day, when you're ready, step out into the light. They'll see you then. And by then, it won't matter, because you'll already see yourself. I was never the maid. I mean, I clean better than anybody in this city. But I was never only that. I never was. And I never will be made to feel like it again. You don't have to announce a sunrise. It just shows up. And the whole sky has to deal with it. If this one hit home, if you've ever been the invisible one at your own family's table, tell me down in the comments, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have walked out? Would you have invited them to that gala? And if you're not subscribed,